My guest today is Michael Yon, author, combat correspondent, and former Green Beret. We discuss his recent journeys to the Darien Gap in Panama, the millions of illegal immigrants heading to the United States via the Darien, and China's involvement in it all. Michael is a seasoned combat journalist, having covered conflicts and world events in more than 80 countries. He presents a unique, on the ground perspective that very few others can provide. Stay tuned. Michael Yon, thanks for talking to me today, man. It's an honor to have you on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me on. I mean, you can see it's really rough here in the jungle of, it's a swimming pool and a golf course. I'm in South Florida.
Yeah, man. So, I was. It's funny because, I always imagine you somewhere deep in the mud in the Darien Gap. So it's actually kind of nice to see you sitting by a pool.
Yeah, that's pretty uncommon. But it does happen.
So I wanted to talk to you specifically about what's happening down in the Darien. There's a lot of activity down there right now. There's a lot going on that I think we're not aware of. And first, can you tell the audience what the Darien Gap is, where it's located, and what you see going on down there?
Yeah, the Darien Gap is that area between Colombia and Panama. They call it the Gap because there's a highway that goes from Alaska all the way to the tip of South America, but there's one gap where there's no road, and so that's why they call it the Gap. Actually, down there they call it Tampon de Darien, which is the tampon of Darien, the plug, right? And so, but it's clearly about to be unplugged because they're building a bridge and they're going to be building a road down to Colombia now. And in fact, I was the first one to report on it. I went down there and found it just a few months ago, maybe 4 or 5 months ago. I don't remember, but because each time when I go to Darien, I will go and look to see if they're trying to build if they started building a road to Colombia, because I just suspected that they would, and they are now. And so one day, some months ago, I was down there and I saw a bunch of mud tracks out it was still rainy season. Saw a bunch of mud out on the street where trucks had been coming onto the road. And I'm like, okay, followed that back, not very far. And sure enough, they're starting the bridge out into the Darien Gap across the Rio Chucunaca, the Chucunaca River.
And so why are they building a bridge, and do we know who's building the bridge?
Actually, I was just talking with somebody yesterday about tracking the money down more, who's doing it, because somebody's clearly trying to obscure who's paying for it. It's not like there's no big sign there that says so-and-so is doing it, that sort of thing. And the people working there don't know. It's just like, we're building a bridge. This is our job. And so, and when we ask them why are you building the bridge here? They said it's to bring yuca out, the food. I'm like, okay. But if you look at the bridge, because I've been down there numerous times now since they've been doing it, droning it and looking at the pylons and that sort of thing. This is going to be a bridge strong enough to for tanks to come over. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that they're going to use tanks, but it's certainly big enough to take those giant jungle trees over. Because, those trees out in the Darien Gap are easily worth billions of dollars. And this is a huge resource that is being depleted. I mean, it's a beautiful jungle and it's just being raped. I mean, it's just really being chopped down and raped. And, we don't see anybody. I see none of the environmentalists, quote unquote, screaming about it, despite that we've gotten the word out to tens of millions of people and not a single one of them, to our knowledge, has ever piped up. It's always let the aliens come through, do whatever you're going to do until, because as we know, the environmentalists are as weaponized as Antifa or Black Lives Matter. I mean, they're basically meat puppets, right? You find these little robots and you wind them up and let them go and they explode like hand grenades, right? Because when it comes to actually doing something important, like saving the Darien jungle, they're just vacant, even though everybody knows about it now. So the Darien Gap, if you can get your feet anywhere in South America, you can get to anywhere in the United States easily. You just have to find yourself up to Colombia, unless you've flown right into Colombia, and then go through the Darien Gap. So it's going to be a trek through the jungle. Some of the treks are relatively easy, depends on which route you take. Others are deadly, very dangerous, very difficult. It depends on which route. If you got more money, you take what we call the China route. That is because most of the Chinese take the China route. It takes a lot more money. They go through Kuna Indian Comarca, which is a reservation, and then they come into another reservation after they cross over the Continental Divide. You actually cross the Continental Divide down there because the Continental Divide, the same one up in North America, goes right on down through Mexico and right through Panama, right? And so they cross over that. Anyway, then they come into another reservation, Imbra Wunan Reservation, and then finally they get onto buses and go to Costa Rica and to the United States. So if you've got a lot of money, say $20,000, $30,000, for a Chinese person, it'll be easy to get to the United States because the Chinese have their own ecosystem within an ecosystem. Theirs is more. They even have videos out. It makes it look like you're just going on a jungle adventure. But the ones where like the Haitians and the Venezuelans and well, not all the Venezuelans. A lot of the Venezuelans have money too. They will go through the hard route, and the Cubans used to go through the hard route about 3 years ago. It used to be the number one. When I first started going down there was right after Biden was installed, just like, I don't know, a couple of weeks after he was installed, because I went straight to the border after the inauguration. I went to El Paso, and then I went to Colombia. I went to El Paso, and you could see we were just getting flooded immediately. And the Border Patrol's like, well, he got installed. Now we're getting invaded. The invasion is increasing. And so flew down to Colombia with Chuck Holton and Masako Ganaha, went into the Darien slightly on that side, not deep. That was a very dangerous side. Even being at the launch point is quite dangerous at Capurganá or Akande. And so, and then flew around and went on to the Panama side. Now, on the Panama side of the Darien Gap, I've spent probably 6 months there since Biden was installed. So I'm pretty familiar with it, pretty familiar with the Indians out there, Center Front, which is sort of the Panamanian Border Patrol, sort of border police, almost like an army, extremely professional, very fit, ready to fight too. I mean, they get into firefights out there with the cartels and whatnot. But actually, they mostly help the aliens that are coming through. Not mostly. I mean, that's what they do. They try not to let them die out there, and that sort of thing. But the bottom line is the invasion is increasing through the Darien. Now, keep in mind, the Darien isn't the only invasion route. There are many others. People fly in from Colombia every day. They fly in from Guatemala every day. They're coming up near me here in Florida. That's why I'm here. I'm not in Florida on vacation. No, I'm from Florida. I love Florida. I rarely come here, right? Florida's on my mind. I'm a Florida boy. I grew up catching alligators here, right? And I could still catch one tonight if I wanted to, right? And so, but I'm here because of we're being invaded here as well. You see what's happening in Haiti, Bahamas is closer to me right now than Key West is, right? So I mean, and I'm in Florida, and there's a big port owned by the Chinese closer to me now than Key West is, right? So I mean, China has a port right off of our coast, right? And they're slowly, clearly taking the Bahamas. The Bahamas is clearly part of the invasion route. It's another sort of aquatic Darien Gap. Doesn't have the numbers of Darien at this point, but you can see what's happening with Haiti and other things. I think you'll find that the Bahamas will become destabilized. Turks and Caicos will become destabilized. Other places, well, you can see what's happened to Haiti, but I believe places like Puerto Rico, these are all going. They're all lined up on the chopping block, and there's a fight brewing between Guyana and Venezuela. By the way, Guyana is, of course, that tiny country down on the top of South America. It's a British or old British, and they speak English, right? And so, but they have a lot of energy, right? Mm-hmm. And Venezuela has a lot of guns, and Venezuela is their neighbor. So basically, your rapacious neighbor with lots of guns wants your oil, wants your your energy, and now as Eric Prince recently said, Venezuela, of course, has a very close relationship with Iran. We see Iranians coming through the Darien Gap every single day. They come to Venezuela. They get a new passport, a Venezuelan passport on arrival. Venezuela has a very close relationship with China and with Russia. And actually, a good man to talk to about this is Joseph Humeyer. He's extremely knowledgeable. If you've never talked with him, but the same missiles that the Houthi are using to close the Suez, or have used to close the Suez, could easily be used to close the Panama Canal. Right now, this may sound hocus pocus, but a lot of the things that some of us say that sounded hocus pocus before have come to pass or are coming to pass year after year after year. And a lot of times it seems like it's kind of Nostradamus-like, but it's not. It's actually like when I predicted, quote unquote, the civil war in Iraq a year and a half ahead of everybody else, or almost everybody else, certainly ahead of any mainstream or any, it wasn't really predicting. I was in Iraq and I was watching the civil war. So, I mean, it was like, I'm predicting there's a fire while looking at the fire, and everybody else is looking in a different direction. Is like, no, there's no fire. I'm like, turn around, it's over here,
Right.
But then the problem with the Iraq civil war was it was politically charged. So there was people who were, like Bill Roggio. He was a total meat puppet like Biden is now, but he was a little blogger. But he's one of those guys that would, he just says here's your talking points, Bill,
Right.
and the thing is if you're going to go to war, truth and lies are very important, obviously. But if you want to win the war, you need to tell the truth, right? But you at least need to, if you're a doctor, let's say, you need to treat the right disease, right? I mean, if there is a cancer, but you're treating it as a headache because it's politically inexpedient for the patient to have cancer, it's like you're killing the patient. The patient has cancer. Treat cancer. It's like, no, well, we can't say that. Politics, It's like, okay, another dead patient, right? And likewise with the Civil War, you would treat a civil war differently than you would treat other types of war. And I just kept saying there is a civil war component. There are other components as well, but in some of the provinces like like Anbar province and out in Diyala province and some there were components of civil war that were growing, right? But likewise now, Darien Gap. So I went down there right after Biden was installed, went down there with Chuck Holton and Masako Ganaha and started immediately reporting. I think this is going to become the main corridor, right, of invasion. And now some of that is hocus pocus because I had to use my magic ball to figure that out. But the routes were already established. People were already coming through. It was the only crystal ball part was, would it increase or not? And I was saying I thought that it would, and it would become one of the main invasion routes, which it now has, right? But the reason I was saying that was based on other things I had researched in other places. So it wasn't completely hocus pocus there either. I was joking around with Ann Vandersteel the other night. We were having dinner and we were talking about this very thing with her husband, John. And I said, some of these predictions I do, they seem so outlandish, but it's like, Alex Jones or whatever, he predicts these things and he seems so crazy. He's just a nutcase and he turns out to be right again. Right. And sometimes he swings and misses, but mostly he's pretty on target, actually. Right. If he was a stock analyst, he'd be filthy rich. And, but he'd lose a few billion now and then, but he would make it back at plus, and, but it's like, we were sitting at a dinner table and I said, look, some of these predictions are like, I see a flash of lightning in the distance. It's quite bright. And I'm like, you know what? I bet there's going to be a really loud sound soon. You know what I mean? It's like, here it comes. Yeah, and there it is. I told you so. And it's the same way with some of this other stuff. Like everybody running down to Eagle Pass recently with, this, there goes Greg Abbott, he's fighting the feds or whatever. No, he's not. He's a member of the World Economic Forum. That is all you need to know, right? He is part of the invasion. All these so-called fights that Greg Abbott has are what's called kayfabe, right? Where I first picked up that term was not from Brett Weinstein, but from his brother, Eric Weinstein. He was describing that term. And it's because it was interesting. When somebody uses a word and then they explain it. You're like, exactly. I know exactly what you're talking about. Thank you for blessing me with this word.
Right.
And because once you have a word, it's easier to communicate with people as long as they understand the meaning of that word, right? And that's why we have language. It means, like water means water. So kayfabe, kayfabe is a wrestling term that when you have these fake fights, layered deception, as Eric Weinstein explains, right? And now that he keyed me up and tuned me up to that word that the wrestlers use it, and it seems to have come from the wrestling world. I looked at videos of wrestlers and writing of wrestlers talking about it. They're talking about how they do the kayfabe, how to keep kayfabe, like don't be seen showing up to the wrestling ring with your arch enemy and getting out, laughing and joking, or being seen with them in a bar laughing and joking or whatever, because everybody knows it's fake, or let's say most people know it's fake. And if you probably don't, but most people know wrestling is fake, right?
Right.
But if you act it well enough, it somehow, because one of the interesting things about writing fiction, not that I write fiction, but I've studied writing quite a lot. One of the interesting things about writing fiction is, or just fictional movies, our brains, most of them can't quite tell the difference.
Right.
Even though we know it's fake. We know Apocalypse Now is fake.
Right.
Sort of.
A little bit. Not so much anymore, right?
Yeah, sort of. You know what I mean? And it's the same with the like you see the kayfabe there with they're having these fake fights, and meanwhile, if I say CNN is terrible, they're absolutely ridiculous, they're useless, immediately people will think, oh, you must be a Fox watcher. I'm like, no, they are too. But because that's the kayfabe that has been organized and set up, right?
Right.
But ultimately, they are doing the same thing. Ultimately, they are working for the same masters, right? Mm-hmm. And so they have these fake fights, and CNN hit Fox over the head with a chair. Fox
cage match, ladder match.
Fox throws CNN out of the ring. They're taking it to the studio. And so it's the same with Abbott. It's the same with Abbott fighting Biden. But meanwhile, Greg Abbott, governor of Texas, was taking buses and loading these aliens up to places like New York. And all my conservative friends in Texas, I'm in Texas all the time, right? I love Texas. I'm from Florida. I'm a Florida man, but I love Texas too.
Right.
I love two states. All my conservative friends in Texas were like, see what our guy, you keep putting down Abbott, but look what he's doing to those guys. I'm like, do you get it? He's taking a syringe and stabbing it deeper into our heart.
Right.
He's clearing the decks of the Rio Grande. More are coming in. He is acting as an enemy agent. And then, he meaning Abbott, Governor Abbott, Greg Abbott of Texas. Greg Abbott, I shouldn't say he and she so much. People mix up which pronouns I'm talking about. So, Greg Abbott, he's putting up the next concert. Greg Abbott's putting up the next concertina on the border there with Mexico. I'm down there watching it, and I'm watching it come up on the news. And Abbott's up there. I was on the Mexican side of Piedras Negras, and I was on the phone with Steve Bannon. That's who I was on with. I was on with War Room, right?
Right.
And I had just watched this thing where Abbott is going, they're closing that area at Eagle Pass, and I'm like, this was like 2 years ago or something, maybe longer. And I remember my phone was getting hot and overheated. I had to take it off the thing and stick it in the Rio Grande to cool it off, without just in the water, and it worked. The iPhone actually worked after I did that, and so then I was able to make the call back. And at one point I was yelling at the National Guard on the other side, like, "Hey, I was just watching your governor. You're supposed to be sending them back to me." I was on the Mexican side. You know why I'm on the Mexican side? I'm on the Mexican side because on the U.S. side they give me a hard time. On the Mexican side, I just go have some. They have good food down there, man. And they're nicer. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like the cops on the Mexican side are like, oh, have fun. On the U.S. side, they're like, why are you here? I'm like, why? Everybody that covers the border has had problems.
You should be like, why are you here? Look at what's happening. Why are you here?
Oh, and Eagle Pass PD and everybody else down there, Border Patrol. Most of the Border Patrol clearly don't like what's going on. And
Right.
actually, a lot of them are highly professional, and they're very serious people, and they want to stop this, and they feed us information, and they're very professional. But there are others who are straight, and and it's a lot of them that are very aggressive towards anybody down there with a camera.
Right.
They are clear enforcers for the invasion cartels, right? Which
Right.
means the U.S. government.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, because a lot of people you'll hear say, "Oh, we need to do the remain in Mexico policy or whatever. We'll teach those Mexicans." No, you won't. The Mexicans aren't doing it. Like my good friend Todd Bensman, he and I argue about this one thing. He always wants to, put sanctions against Panama or whatever. I'm like, are you kidding? Panama is our friend. They're our ally.
Yeah.
They don't want to do it either. I'm with the Panamanian government frequently, right? They want to stop it too, but they don't because they're being pressured by IOM, UN, IOM, United States government openly, right in front of me. I see it with my eyes. Like when Mayorkas came down there on April 18th of 2022, I'd waited 4 days for him, and he came down in 4 Blackhawks on the 4th day, landed right in front of me because I thought, if he comes to Panama, I got tipped off he might come to Panama. I said, if he comes to Panama, I bet he'll come to land right here. And I waited for 4 days, and the Great Pumpkin arrived. And then he came to a place called San Vicente Camp down there. That's the camp I took Brett Weinstein to, and Chris Martinson and Vandersteel and I took him down there. And you see Brett Weinstein is there with Chris Martinson right at the front gate. And there was just a fire there 2 weeks ago, by the way. But in any case, when Mayorkas went there, he promised $18 million more to increase that camp and some others, and he has. The camps have dramatically increased in size. Not only are they bigger, they're more efficient. In other words, the pipes are smooth now. In the past, when you're coming through Colombia to Panama, it could take you a couple of weeks to get through easily, 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, and then you finally get to Costa Rica. Actually, when you get near the Costa Rica border, there's another camp, right? But now you can literally get on the button. Now you can get, when you make it through the Darien Gap, let's say you come through the easy route, the China route, you can leave Colombia, be at San Vicente Camp, where I took Brett and Chris Martinson. You can be there in 2 days. 3 is safely. You can be there safely in 3 days. And then you can be to the Costa Rican border in 1 more day, right? So you can literally leave Colombia and be in Costa Rica easily within 4 days. If you're lucky and the timing's right, you come in at the right time of day, you can easily do it in 3 days, right? Right. It depends on what time of day you come out of the jungle. But the bottom line is, this is all, so the pipes are much smoother and the pipes are bigger, right? And a lot of times I talk with some of these. Well, anyway, Todd knows the border. Todd Bensman very well, and he's very smart. He's very much worth listening to. I watch his feeds. I've read his book, Overrun, and I highly suggest, if you haven't had him on, you have him on. But we disagree on this one little thing that I disagree with almost everybody on, that we don't need to do sanctions against Panama or Colombia or Mexico. It's our government. Our government is captured by WEF CCP. It's open. It's not hidden. WEF is the World Economic Forum, and they are consanguinated with the Chinese Communist Party, right? It's crystal clear. Again, and so what are we going to do by going after Panama? We're going to distance them even more, right? They're going to fall right into China's glove, which is perfect. So that's why, I saw Dr. Phil recently talking about, he went down to the border, credit on him. He went down to the border, and then he started talking about, we need to do the Remain in Mexico thing, sort of punish the Mexicans or whatever like that. It will not work, period. You've really got to spend a week with somebody like me or Ann Vandersteel or Masako Ganaha, Chuck Holton, one of us. Just spend a week with us. You will leave with a great deal of knowledge about what's actually going on. And then you'll start to see why the Remain in Mexico policy it's ridiculous. It's like saying, let's block the Mississippi River with this little light. Okay, I'm going to put this light. The Mississippi River is now blocked. Why? Because I say so. Right. And so the thing is they're flying in every day from Guatemala. They're flying on our flights. They're flying in every day from Colombia. Fill out the CBP One app on your phone, and boom, they fly right in. They're coming across the Canadian border 24/7. They're coming up on the beach here in Florida. That's why I'm here. I'm here because they're coming up on the beach. Now, we know people have been coming up on the beach since forever, but I think just based on, hocus pocus, that I think that Florida will become a profoundly major invasion point, or at least the conditions are set for that. I would say, well, the fact that I'm here tells you, and I have voted with my feet. I love Florida. I really, my soul is in this place. But I tell people, I told somebody yesterday, if I show up to your neighborhood and I'm working, you should probably be thinking about selling your property. I mean,
you're like the angel of death. Wherever you go, you just basically wherever Michael Yon is where you're more than likely going to be dealing with a sudden surge of illegal immigrants in your town.
Yeah, or war, right? And actually, I was on the phone yesterday with somebody, Ann Vandersteel and I were, and I was mentioning that, and that's what she said, because Michael's like the angel of death. If he shows up, it's not that I bring the cooties. I go to where the cooties are.
Right.
You know what I mean? You know what cooties are, by the way? This is interesting when it comes to war. Cooties is an old English word, right? They came up with some cool words in that country. And and one of them is cooties. Cooties means lice, right?
Okay.
And so that game that you learn how to play when you're children is to learn how to avoid lice. He's got cooties. She got cooties, right? That's why when you see somebody that looks disheveled and they're on the street, you're like, be careful, it might have cooties, right? But I mean, you don't get that.
Makes sense.
That's cultural firmware that you've been. The thing is, and why to avoid lice so much? Because you can get diseases like typhus.
Right.
Typhus is one of it's like the World Series of bad diseases. Typhus, epidemic typhus. It's up there with.
Right.
It's up there with yellow fever and smallpox and tuberculosis. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's where that word. So anyway, go ahead, sir.
No, so just to recap for our audience, for people who may not be aware, so the Darien, just to recap what Michael was talking about, the Darien Gap is the gap between Panama and Colombia, and it's typically the route that illegal immigrants will take from Central and South America to get up to the United States through the southern border. Now, the one thing I wanted to talk to you about is that the two different routes situation, because you have one route which is primarily taken by people from Central and South America, and then another route which is being taken by Chinese. Now, I'm originally from Vancouver, British Columbia, which was ground zero for the CCP infiltration into Canada. So I'm very familiar with the way they operate. And now, what's crazy to me is that they're actually going through the Darien. Now, why? I wanted to ask you, why two different routes? Now, there are, in addition to that, there are two different camps, one for the Chinese and one for the Central and South Americas. Why are they being kept separate? Is somebody paying to keep them separate? And what's the difference between, like you said, the Chinese, it's like a jungle adventure, whereas for everyone else, they're basically good chances of dying en route. So why is this happening?
Actually, there's a little bit more texture than that. It's not we call it China camp because that's where most of the Chinese go, but it's really money camp and less money camp. Right. And the Chinese go to money camp, right? And so there are a lot of Venezuelans and Iranians, Syrians that go to China camp, and a lot of Afghans. There's a lot of Afghans that come in with a lot. A lot of them are thick. They come in with a lot of money, right?
Right.
And not that they come through the gap with it, but they're clearly not poor people, right? They are taking the more expensive routes and whatnot. So it's the money route and the not money route. Now, demographic warfare is something that China is very good at. They'll do that. They're doing it to Canada, of course, right now. They're doing it to the United States. They're doing it throughout numerous places in Central America. I was in Tibet. That's mostly how they took Tibet. They did kinetics, of course. They came in with guns and that sort of thing, and prisons, but they also just moved Han Chinese in, and it was like the tide coming in. And as the Chinese say, we're not here to really go to war with everybody, because it doesn't make economic sense, right? I mean, you'll go to war. They'll go to war when they have to, and they will go to war. And they've done it many times, but they would prefer just to make you leave or to do something else, right? And so Hong Kong, I was there as well. Of course, I've been to China a lot. I've been like a year in and around China, right? And I spent probably 18 years in Asia, right? Between like a year in India, a year in Nepal, and just all over the place, right? And so I'm kind of familiar with how they roll as well. Hong Kong. they kicked me out in 2020. I was a bad boy. I was there, covering the last throes of their democracy, right?
Right.
But how did they do it? When you really look at how they did it, it was mostly demographic, right? They mostly were when I say they, I go with the pronouns again. It was the Han Chinese, the Chinese Communist Party, dripping the bathtub, filling it up, and the next thing you know, it's filled with Han, or not filled, but there's a sufficient number of Han Chinese, a critical mass, that they go to key positions. They don't just say everybody, hey, go run a laundromat. No, they're like, go become a teacher, especially a history teacher, language teacher, law teacher, and go to politics, go into the police, of course, and professors, of course. So that basically the P's are all lined up there. So the politicians, professors, police, they get into these, they get in to operate the cockpit, right? Mm-hmm. So in other words, there are some cultures that have the cultural firmware to do this. They go to another place, like the Kurds are good at doing this. The Kurds have gone to like Nashville and Tennessee and whatnot, and they go and you'll see them they immediately start to try to get into places of influence. Whereas Cambodians or whatnot, they'll move into some place and they just kind of open up temples and stuff and be Cambodians. But what I'm getting to is the Chinese have a cultural firmware, like they've essentially, and they haven't taken over Thailand, that would be untrue, but a lot of the power positions are run by Chai Thais, right? Chinese Thais, right? One mat, one pillows, as the Thai peoples will call them. They come with one mat and one pillow, and the next thing you know, by the end of their life, they own a whole block in downtown Bangkok or something, right? So, but what I'm getting to is that's the way the Chinese do. They demographic warfare. They become you, right? That's what, and they'll do it. They'll do it, and they'll do it in BC and whatnot as well.
Oh, they did. Yeah. So just not to take up too much time here, but the reason I ask is because the neighborhood that I grew up in, you just described exactly what happened. In 1996, our entire neighborhood was flattened. Mansions went up. We were all pushed out. And then it was just Chinese real estate from there on out. And we just got pushed further and further out of our neighborhoods and our towns until, I'm in Alberta now. That's how far I got pushed away. Right. And so
you're a Tibetan. You're basically a Canadian Tibetan.
Exactly. And so, a lot of the people in the China camp are military-aged men, and that's primarily the Chinese people that are coming up into the United States through the southern border. Do you have any idea why it's mostly military-aged men?
Well, I can take some guesses. A lot of them are going to places like Maine, and they're growing marijuana. Mm-hmm. I was just talking with somebody last night, a detective. He's been a detective for about 25 years. He does organized crime, right? And it's quite interesting because he said he's seeing a lot of Chinese gangs now, and Indians as well. A lot of gangsterism, right? And a lot of fraud, like not just unsophisticated fraud either. But it's interesting, as he said, the Chinese gangs tend to be very cellular. They don't know each other, and that is either maybe through design or maybe just through they're just cellular. You know what I mean? It's just how they organically grew. But in other words, he's like, you can't pull one root and basically find all of them. They all are interconnected in one way or another, but they're cut out enough that they're sort of like islands, right? And so, there's a huge amount of gangsterism coming over now with Chinese gangs, obviously doing the marijuana grows, which people can find online, endless reading about it. Fentanyl, killing thousands of Americans per month, right? Mm-hmm. They're making billions of dollars. The Chinese are making billions of dollars on these things, right? And so, what are they doing now? There are components that I think are just at war on a firmware level. In other words, they've got a cultural firmware that'll come in and just build itself over time and supplant the people that are there, right? Mm-hmm. And then there is a more at the higher level, the Chinese Communist Party is exhibiting that firmware on a larger scale that's much more organized. Like I watched their information war quite closely. The Chinese, I've written 3 books on Chinese information war, and they're only in Japanese. They're not in English, but because I've been trying to wake up the Japanese for forever, and
Right.
because anyway, but the bottom line is watching the Chinese information war is really interesting. You'll see how they're trying to persuade all the Native Americans all the way down through, everywhere in Central America, North America, South America, that you are actually Chinese. You came over on the land bridge. So all this land, you're our cousins, right? And all this land is actually yours. And they took it, which is, it's basically ours, our family, right? And so they do different things. Like they'll find people of Chinese descent. They will invite, especially in people in high positions, not some low position, but if you're like a general or somebody in some significant position, you will be invited to China, to the village where your family came from, and they'll have parades for you. This is an old story. You may know people this has happened to, right? I do. And so you go, they take them over there. They'll show them the grave where their family, where their descendants are buried. You're Chinese. You made good. Great. And then they'll just keep inviting you back and nurture you, and they'll do the normal mousetrap. And counterintelligence, mice is the money, ideology, coercion, ego, right? They try to win you over through one of those. They're looking for which cheese you prefer, right? Because most people will fall for one of those 4, right? For me, it would be ideology, right? Because I'm hardcore American. So I can be enticed with hardcore Americanism, right? I mean, I am very happy and proud to have been born American. A problem with people that are ideologically driven, I mean, if I were born in a different place, I might be screaming Allahu Akbar and doing something crazy, because the ideologically driven people are very difficult to capture with money, and they're very difficult to capture with coercion or ego, right? So we're relatively immune as long as you're above Maslow's hierarchy. And if you're really seriously an ideologically driven person, these are the kinds of people that eventually the despots want to kill, actually, right? Because they're the ones that are like, hey, we just can't reason with these people. They got to be killed. We can't get them with money. We can't get them with coercion. We can't get them with ego. So we got to get them with guns, right? And so, but what I'm getting to is they get the people over to China, that they call those overseas Chinese, right? Those are the ones who live in places like El Salvador. They live in Honduras. I was speaking with one recently in Honduras. He's a retired general, and he'd been invited to China. So now the other types of that they try to recruit psychologically are the like the natives, like the Ainu people, or let's say the Okinawans in Okinawa. They're trying to persuade the Okinawans that they are actually of Chinese descent, right? And so, for instance, I was talking with Masako Ganaha, the famous Japanese journalist, the other day, 2 or 3 nights ago. And I was on the phone. Masako and Ann Vandersteel and I were all on a joint call. And I said, Masako, can you go to the Chinese statue that you were talking about and put the camera on the toes? I want to see how many toes it has, how many claws it has, right? If it has 5 claws, that means China is claiming that as their territory, right? This is ours. And if it has 4 claws, then it's like their cousin, right? If it has 3 claws, you're our friend, right? Then it has 5 claws. And she said, interesting, it has 5 claws. And it's interesting, too, because the Chinese, when they do tours to Okinawa, many of them are taken straight to that statue. Now, that statue doesn't mean anything to Americans. They're like, it's another dragon statue. Chinese see the 5 claws. They're like, hey, this is ours, right? So they're not only persuading the local people that they're Chinese, they're persuading the Chinese that that's our land. Like, I've been to China. I go to their museums. They're not going to let me back, I'm sure. I wouldn't go back now, but I've been such a bad boy when they kicked me out of Hong Kong. But the thing is when you go to Chinese museums, they're trying to persuade all the Chinese that Japan is our mortal enemy, and that's our land, right? Same with Taiwan. Let's talk about Taiwan just for a minute. A lot of people know that Taiwan is a breakaway province of China, right? Everybody knows that, right? But what everybody knows is actually wrong, because it's information war. When I ask people, especially these historians will talk about the breakaway province of Taiwan, I'm like, oh yeah, let's talk about that. Everybody knows it's a breakaway province. When did it break away, actually? Like when?
I
And
don't
they're like,
know.
I know, nobody knows. You know why nobody knows is because it never was a province, period.
Right.
Taiwan was the number of days that Taiwan was part of China would be 0. Never. Not 1 minute. Taiwan was never a part of China, period, at
Right.
all, right? But you'll have these serious analysts, so-called, that know, talk about China hand, been doing China stuff for 30 years or whatever, 40 years, and they'll still call it the breakaway province. Well, it is not a breakaway province, period. Zip, zero. It's just information war, like map
Right.
warfare. They draw the map a certain way, and people listen. Do you see that big fight between Nicaragua and Costa Rica? I don't know if it's still ongoing, but some years ago, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, I don't remember, but it may have been 15 years ago. But anyway, Google Earth drew the map and did not include this island in the river, by Costa Rica. Nicaragua. I've crossed over that island before on foot. That river anyway, and then it caused those two to start having a fight
Right.
because one side is saying, "Hey, that's our island," and the other side, "No, it's not. Look at the Google Earth map, right? You can draw a map and start a fight,
Right.
But that's also when you're doing information war. You make the maps, you make the museums, you write the books, you get the plays done. You call it a breakaway province, a breakaway province, a breakaway province, a breakaway province. You say that 10,000 times, a breakaway province, and then everybody knows it's a breakaway province. How do you know it's a breakaway province? Everybody knows it's a break. Just like the crows. That's not a crow, but the crows. Caw, caw. How does the crow know it's caw, caw? Because all the other crows know it's caw, caw, right?
Right.
But what I'm getting to is the information war. Always watch your enemy's information war, especially if they're sophisticated. Even very unsophisticated enemies tend to do an information war. They just tend to do it more crudely, and it tends to be shorter. But the very sophisticated enemies, the ones who have it built into their DNA almost, or certainly into their cultural DNA, their cultural firmware, let's say, like the Chinese, those information wars can go on for generations, right? Mm-hmm. So in other words, it goes so far back, no matter how far back you look, you'll still see them doing that. Like I found this book, or one of my research partners found a book. What's the name of it? It was written in 1938, I think. The author may have been a guy named Small. I don't recall. But anyway, he's talking about in this book, he's talking about China, right? And he said, it's like 1938. And he's going, Americans never believe anything the Chinese say, unless they're talking bad about Japanese. And then we believe them carte blanche, everything on the face, which is really funny because Americans and Canadians as well, pretty much the whole world gets along with Japan.
Yeah.
Like I spent a lot of time in Japan. I work with Japanese every day and whatnot. And it's interesting. Again, I've spent about 18 years in Asia, all over the place. Thailand, Japan, China, India. Who's 25 countries just in Asia and about 100 countries around the world. I spend most of my life out of the country. It's rare that I'm in the United States these days. Right. And so, one of the things when I go to a new country is I'll ask certain questions. What do you think about your police? What do you think about your courts? What do you think about this? What do you think about that? I'm going down a list of questions. What do you think about your food prices? What do you think? I'm trying to figure, and I'll ask them, what countries who's your enemies? Who are your friends, right? I've asked so many about Japan. And I would say the two most favorite countries in the world, despite Americans think that we're hated all over the world. You're only hated by your neighbors usually. Right. But the United States, up until recently, I don't know, last not too long, has been actually, I would say that and Japan are the two most favorite countries in the world. Right. I was giving a speech in Tokyo maybe 10 years ago, and I said, I've been all over this world, and I asked these certain questions, and I've only found 3 countries that hate Japan. And this is a group of like historians and journalists. Journalists are actually respected in Japan, and you can see that's on the other side of the world where things are backwards. It's like, and I love Japan, but I was giving this speech and I said, there's only 3 countries that I know of that hate Japan. And I was like, which countries do you think those may be? And people are like, China. And I was like, okay, a lot do, due to their information campaign. What's next? People are like, Korea. And I'm like, okay, actually, again, information war. And then people are like, well, North Korea. And I'm like, okay, just combine North Korea. And there's one more. What is it? And everybody's like, I don't know. I'm like, Japan. And they're like, that's right. The country that hates Japan the most is Japan, right? And now
Right.
almost got a standing ovation. You can see the people were like clapping and, I'm like, exactly. I lived in Germany. I speak German. I am American. I've been all over this country in the United States. Every state except Alaska. I'm leaving that one for last. It's last. And now the only state I really want to go to now is the only one I haven't been to. And a lot of Americans hate America. A lot of Germans really detest Germany. Right. A lot of Canadians now hate Canada, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of that is based on information war. We've been taught to hate ourselves. I'm like, Japan, this is the most civilized. I've been to a lot of civilized places in America. You're even more civilized than we are. Look, when I come to Japan, I feel like a savage. And it's not because you're making me feel like it. It's just because you're honestly more civilized than I am. It's like, and I'm informed enough that I can see it. You know what I mean? Right. On the totem pole, I'm a couple heads down. And it's like, they don't even curse in Japan. The worst thing that they can say about somebody is to say you're lazy. Yeah. They'll just be like, you're lazy. You're a lazy man. That would be the gravest insult in the world.
Yeah. Well,
they can't accuse me of that.
Well, listen, Michael, I promised I'd get you out of here in time to get to your next thing. I know you're a super busy guy. This was such an awesome conversation. You're a great dude, man. I'm really glad that I got a chance to get to know you. And I'd love to have you back to go deeper.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
I'll tell you about cannibal hunting. Something more relaxing.
Okay. Well, we have each other. We have each other on Signal now. Yeah, let's do it again, Michael, because there's so much more about this story that we didn't even cover. But in the meantime, can you tell everybody where they can find you?
Yep, I'm on X, previously known as Twitter, previously known as fascist Twitter. What it is now, I'm still unclear. But I'm on X, and it's Michael Yon, my name, Yankee Oscar November, Michael Yon. I'm on Substack and other places as well. And actually, Ann Vandersteel and I have been operating Operation Burning Edge now for about a year, I guess. And actually, the reason.
Hey, Michael, I think I lost your audio. There we go. All right, man. I better say goodbye, and I'll catch you next time. Yeah, okay, awesome. Well, Michael,
Bye,
once
Jesse.
again, man, thank you, man. It was an honor to talk to you. We have each other on Signal now, so we'll set something up for another conversation at a later date.
Let's do it.
Awesome. Thank you, sir.
Adios.